That's right.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we are live now. So we're talking about some of the interesting quirks of Substack Live. How Sharon was just saying we can send people to the moon and back, but we can't eliminate the 8-second delay
Uh,
from when we sign on. But that's,
yeah.
these are small problems, I suppose. Well, we
Yeah.
have a lot of people that are joining us this afternoon, Sharon. So let's let a few people get on, and then we'll get started with our
Yeah.
conversation.
I know. It's good to see you. I know this is a very busy leading up into the 250th anniversary. What is on tap for you, Colleen, this summer? Like what are you doing to celebrate?
What am I? That's a good question. What am I doing to celebrate? Is traveling back and forth across the country and talking to people, which is actually a lot of fun. But
Yeah.
next week I'll be at the Jack Miller Center is having a civics summit in
Yeah.
Philadelphia, so I'm going to
Yep.
be at that, and I'm going to be teaching a seminar on the Declaration of Independence with Lucas.
Ooh.
So I'm really excited about that one because
Yeah.
not too often. I mean, I teach at Georgetown, but not too often I'm always on panels. I never get to actually like teach something
Yeah.
at a conference. So this is going to be a lot of fun, especially talking about the Declaration of Independence. And interestingly enough, Lucas is going to go over the actual declaration itself, but I'm going to be teaching two presidents that interpreted the Declaration, Barack Obama and Calvin Coolidge, and
Ooh.
how their interpretations of the Declaration were similar in some cases and in other cases diverged. So that's what
Yeah.
we're talking about.
That's so interesting. If y'all are joining us, this is Colleen's Substack, but Colleen has some street creds. Okay, she has some street creds.
Yeah.
Like how does one even get to have your former job, Colleen? Like how does one even apply for that?
There's really not an application process. It's one of those jobs where they come to
It's not
you.
a
You
LinkedIn
don't go to them.
situation
Yeah, it's not
where
that.
the National Archives is like, we're hiring.
Yeah, no, it's not that at all. But I mean, I worked for the truth of the matter was I worked for many, many years at two really great organizations, the Library of Congress and then the White House Historical Association,
Yeah.
which both had relevant experience. They were both nonpartisan institutions, and that's really how I got my job at the National
Yeah.
Archives.
Yeah.
Mhm. Well, I mean, let's get started here. I mean, Sharon, thank you so much for joining us. And really, Sharon doesn't need an introduction, but we can try anyways. Sharon McMahon is known as our nation's most famous America's government teacher, a leading light on civics education and history, delivering all kinds of interpretation and content in a nonpartisan way. And Sharon has a terrific Substack called The Preamble, which is a daily Substack that has great content. I know because as soon I get up really early in the morning, but I will tell you, your Substack is always waiting for me. So
It's in your inbox. That's right.
that's
Yep.
right. I assume that's because you have so many teachers that read the preamble. Is that
Yeah.
right?
I mean, I like to have something other than a sale notification when I get up in the morning. Like
That's
I'm
true.
an early riser, and yeah, it's great to see what's on sale for Memorial Day at Old Navy. But sometimes it's nice to have like something more substantive to read while you're drinking your coffee in the morning.
Absolutely. And Sharon's
Yeah.
also the author of a book, The Small and the Mighty, which went to the New York Times bestseller list and I think the USA Today bestseller list. And I mention that because that's your book, but also I mention it because it's one of the big reasons why I asked you to write this essay for In Pursuit
Mm.
on William Henry Harrison, because when I was looking at your book and reading it and looking at the essays, and I was also really at the same time simultaneously thinking, well, who's going to write the essay on William Henry Harrison? Because that's going to be a tough one. It's not like the same as recruiting someone to write Abraham Lincoln or George
Right.
Washington or, Barbara Bush, it's just a different, approach altogether. And I just happened to have your book and looking at it and I said, Sharon McMahon can write this because she is a wizard at taking some of the smaller stories, hence the title of the book, and making them relevant for Americans. The smaller
Well, I
stories.
appreciate that.
Mhm.
That's like extremely high praise coming from you. It really is. You put together such an incredible slate of contributors for In Pursuit. And it's not lost on me that I'm on the roster I'm on the roster, Colleen. Like, that's a big deal.
Yeah, it is. That's right. I
Yeah.
mean, what did it's like, what 8/10 or 9/10 of life is showing up, and you're definitely you've showed up. But you've not just showed up for William Henry Harrison. I shouldn't say that because you've actually written an incredibly insightful essay on Harrison. So let's start with that. I mean, why should we even study him? I mean, he was only president for like what, 31 days or something
Yeah.
like that. So
Yeah.
why should we even bother to write an essay or think about him in a critical way?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, I've had this conversation with a number of people because he's seen as such a do nothing president because he was in bed sick almost the entirety of his presidency. He's very easy to forget about. And what most people know about him is that he's the grandfather of a different president. Like that's he got sick in the rain and then he died. And then, his descendant becomes president. That's if anyone knows anything, that's all it is.
But
But one of the things that I think is interesting about him, there's really sort of two sort of buckets. One of them is sort of the birth of the modern campaign, which we can talk about if you want. But the other one is his view of democracy. Now, his view of democracy is, we have to understand the context in which he is operating. He's born to a very well known Southern slaveholding family. His ancestors signed the Declaration of Independence. As much as he painted this image of himself as being like from a log cabin on the frontier, as much as that was this persona that he adopted, that was not the. He was born into a much more privileged background than that, and of course, his father dies, and he's a younger son and doesn't have a lot of inheritance, and that impacts his later life. But all of this is being born into a family of the earliest Americans, the people who are here from the country's inception. He's born in the 18th century. This impacts how he views the concepts of democracy. And so, what stands out to me about him is in part this backdrop of and lens through which he views how we should know like what is real democracy and what he kind of refers to, I'm paraphrasing, as this sort of like fake version of what democracy should be.
Okay, let's start with the campaigning. I mean, because you're right, it is a real departure of previous campaigns where presidential candidates didn't really campaign in the way that we think of
Mhm.
campaigning. But this is 1840, and Martin Van Buren is the president, and he's not super popular because there's been an economic depression. And people, even back then, it turns out, even in the 1830s and 1840s, they're blaming the president for the condition of the economy. So some things don't change, right? Some things
Mhm.
don't change at all. Talk to us about the campaign. There's like slogans, there's songs,
Mhm.
there's all kinds of things that we would associate with modernity. And it seems a little strange that maybe Harrison, like you said, who was born in the 1700s, would engage in this type of politicking.
Yeah. Well, yes, you're right that like it wasn't gas prices back then, but it was always something. And
Maybe
there's
horses.
always a tremendous amount of discontent that's downstream from economic unrest. Economic unrest always gives way to political unrest.
Mhm.
And the idea is that you can hopefully you can tamp down the political unrest before it turns into something bigger, into political violence or something more. But yes, Martin Van Ruin,
Mhm.
as Harrison liked to call him, like the idea that we would give our opponent a kind of a mean nickname, that is something that seems normal in today's day and age. The current president loves nicknames and uses them regularly. That's part of his rhetoric as president. So it seems normal to be like, he's terrible. He's Martin Van Ruin. But that was not always used in terms of political campaigning. It is true that previous political opponents like Jefferson and Adams definitely stabbed each other in the newspapers. They hired, like the anonymous writers to send mean messages back and forth. But they weren't used in political campaigning because campaigning, to your point, was not what it was. We really saw the tides begin to turn during the Andrew Jackson, John Quincy Adams era. But this is like the first time when we see the emergence of things like merch and rallies and parades and slogans and like floats that with symbolism that would be associated with a political candidate. And so things that seem relatively normal to us, if we think about like the last presidential election, Kamala Harris is famously now associated with the Beyonce's song Freedom. Like if you hear that song right now, you probably think of Kamala Harris,
Mhm.
right? And if you see a red hat, you associate that with Donald Trump. There are these symbols that have become so closely tied to candidates that they transcend what they actually represent. And that was what was happening with the Harrison campaign. They successfully co-opted the symbolism of the log cabin with hard cider and other things that were viewed as sort of like backwoods, down home, frontiersman, military man. Um, you can vote for me. And then they had slogans that people could chant and songs they could sing that helped galvanize a community around a candidate in ways that we had not previously seen in the United States. This sort of like um, identification with a candidate, like he's the man for me, was really kind of a new sentiment.
And you see these pictures and depictions of this campaign. It's just kind of amazing, the depictions of Harrison. Really,
Mhm.
they actually have images of him, drawn in front of a log cabin, and he's also kind of associated with cider.
Yeah,
And there was bottles of cider that were given out, and
in the shape of log cabins in some
yeah,
cases. Yes.
kind of a good piece of merchandise. Probably, you would assume would be a very popular. And
They're highly collectible now. They're
oh, I
like
bet,
the log cabin bottles, highly
I bet.
collectible. Yeah.
But they're worth a lot of money. And then the slogan is Tippy Canoe and Tyler too. And Tyler, of course, is the vice president. Yeah,
Mhm,
that friends with Harrison, the vice presidential candidate. So, I mean, fast forward to obviously Harrison and Tyler win. Fast forward to the inauguration, which is really all we have of
mhm,
William Henry Harrison as the president, because as you point out, not too long after that, he gets sick and he spends really the rest of his presidency in bed because he's trying to recover from the illness and eventually succumbs to it. But I will say this, thankfully, the inaugural address is chock full of really important messages from Harrison.
mhm,
If you're only going to do one thing, I mean, he really does the one thing kind of in a big way. So we're
mhm,
going to talk about some of the messages that he offers in this inaugural address, which are really still relevant today, even though this was 1841. They're
mhm,
highly relevant today. So the first thing that he talks about, and of course he's a Whig, he's part of the Whig Party, but one of the big messages that he has is that power concentrated in singular hands in a democracy is bad, right? This,
mhm,
it doesn't like a classical thing from Roman republicanism and things like that. But he says this is really bad. In particular, power concentrated in the executive
mhm,
is dangerous.
mhm,
Now, how does he get to that when when Madison and everybody else is drafting the Constitution? They're not actually afraid of the executive. They're afraid of Congress, of the legislature, that's
mhm.
going to be too powerful. So why is Harrison so concerned about the executive?
Mm. My interpretation of this, of how he gets there, is Andrew Jackson.
Mm,
Andrew Jackson, who famously sort of remade the presidency. We still talk to this day about Jacksonian democracy, about Jacksonian politics. His Andrew Jackson's influence on the nation reverberates today in a large variety of ways. Everything from Native American policy to ways in which the president wielded their power. Today, we see Jackson's relationship to the Supreme Court coming up in relationship to how modern presidents view the Supreme Court. So Jackson really as the first Democrat president, Jackson really remade the presidency largely in his own image. And he was this big, larger than life character, had some similarities to Harrison in that they're both military heroes. But some of that his view of an overreaching executive has to be colored by Jackson. And of course, by Jackson's, successor, Van Buren.
That makes
And one
sense.
of the things that he says, this is a quote from Harrison's inaugural address. He says, "The great danger does not appear to me to be in a usurpation of power not granted,
Mm,
but in the accumulation in one of the departments of that which was assigned to others." And he's referring
mm,
to the executive seizing control of power that was meant to belong, in particular, to Congress. This is still a debate that we are having today.
absolutely.
To what extent does the legislature have to affirmatively grant power to the executive? We see this with like emergencies. We saw this, for example, when Biden was president. Biden wanted to use a specific law to forgive student loans. And ultimately, that case went to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court said that law does not give the executive the power to forgive student loans. So that's just one simple example of hundreds of ways in which we are still arguing about ways that the executive wants to. There's an inclination often wants to take power for themselves because guess what? Congress is a little bit broken, Colleen. It's a little bit broken right now. Everyone agrees. There's nobody who's like, this is all going great. Everything's functioning normally. Doesn't matter which side of the aisle you're on. And
Well,
so,
one of my favorite quotes was John McCain, when he's when Congress's, approval rating, which has hovered, between like 13, 14%, maybe at the high point, 19, 20% in the past so many years. John McCain said at one point famously, we're down to staff and family.
right,
Like,
who likes
that's the only
us?
people that are
Yeah,
saying that they approve of us is staff, everybody
yeah,
in these buildings, and our
right.
families. Like,
Either you're getting paid or you're related to me.
right.
Those are the only people who are
I
like,
think
I
it's a
think it's
really
pretty
great,
good. Yeah.
observation by John McCain. You had really good quips sometimes.
Yes, yes. And lots of people like their individual member of Congress, but like the body as a whole is relatively dysfunctional.
Right.
And I would argue that it's gotten worse over time, but you can see the seeds of that in
Yep.
from 1841 when this speech was given. Here we are, all of these years later, still arguing about these exact same issues. They're not new to America.
Right. Okay, so that's the first thing. The second thing he talks about is, about the sort of the quality of leadership and the type of leaders that are elected. And he says you have to be able to distinguish between those that are fraudulent protectors of liberty and those who are true protectors of liberty that we can actually trust in a Republican government. So, what do you think he meant by that? What did that mean?
Mm. Yeah, he says he described the old trick. This is a quote of Harrison, the old trick of those who would usurp the government of their country, and they would wear a familiar costume. Leaders speak in the name of democracy, and they stir up fear about aristocracy and wealth. This is a jab at Jackson,
Right.
because Jackson was, a populist who was against the elites that he viewed were ruling the country. He viewed himself, of course, Harrison viewed himself, and I'm sure Jackson viewed himself as well, though their view of each other would have differed. Viewed himself as one of sort of like the true defenders of democracy, the true protectors of democracy. And he actually, in this speech, goes through and sort of delineates here is how you can tell the difference between, this fraud, this type of political fraud is what he called it. And we're not talking about necessarily fraud where somebody stole someone's identity or like took money from them or, we're not talking about the crime of fraud, but we're talking about like a political fraud where the the wool is pulled over the people's eyes, and they're led to believe that the leader is protecting democracy in one way, but in reality, they are not. So, this is as much an exhortation to the public to be mindful, to keep their eye out, to know what they're looking for. It's difficult to protect something you don't understand, and also, without naming names, sort of a jab at the way things used to be, and sort of casting a vision for how he viewed his own leadership.
Right. Right. Yeah, and that's a fair point because as you pointed out, he's born in the 1700s. So he's born, in that, patrician area of politics, and he's made the transition into this new transition into party-based politics and things like
Mhm.
that. And that's the third point, really, which is the existence of political parties.
Mm,
He
mm,
has some really, negative things to say about the party system in
mhm,
the United States, and is very exacerbated by it.
mhm.
Also pretty relevant for today, right?
100%. And this is, of course, before the advent of the Republican Party, which doesn't come for another 20 plus years. And as you already mentioned, he is a Whig, which is a party that doesn't really exist in the United States anymore. But the party system had gone through a considerable amount of evolution in a very short period of time, from when the Republic was founded, having no parties, to then sort of dividing yourself into these, factions of, the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, and then all of the morphing that had happened over, like the last 40 or so years, to where we have the emergence of this Whig Party. But he viewed, and I would argue that a lot of Americans would, if I took William Henry Harrison's name off of this and was like, "Do you agree with these statements?" I would imagine that a large number of Americans would be like, "Heck yeah, that's right." Like, here are some examples of what he said. He said that political parties become destructive of public virtue, and eventually its inevitable conqueror. What he means is that the political parties will gain more power than the people.
Mhm.
And that is a place that he did not think was a good place to go. So he viewed that his view was that the power should always lie with the citizens, and the power should not lie in the hands of the political parties, and that to hand over that kind of power to political parties was a path to the destruction of liberty.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of people if you remove your affinity for your own political party. Most people have a political party that they more closely align with. If you remove your affinity for that party and you just step back and look at, like, is this system in which a couple of groups of people that are run by unelected bureaucrats funded by dark money? This is not the same in 1840,
Yeah,
by the way.
sure.
Um, but if you just look at the facts, most people would say, no, that's not fair. That the
Right.
power should belong with the people. That's how the framers intended it. That's why in the preamble they wrote "we the people" and not "we the political parties," and not even we the individual state governments, like we the people.
Well, what do
Uh,
you think Harrison would have said? I have to ask you this question
yeah.
because I read in 1840 that 80% of the eligible electorate in the United States, and that's not 80% of the population. At this point in time, it's just really white men, although non-propertied white men are starting to be able to vote. So 80% though of the eligible population votes in
Yes,
1840. I mean, that is super high.
that's incredible.
But that is done through, in part, political parties organizing and getting people out to vote and things like that. So what do you think? I mean, that is the other side of the coin. Even though Harrison says there's damaging aspects of political parties, they do serve as a catalyst for democratic participation.
Mm, mm. They sure do. There's definitely not there's It's not that political parties are the mafia in the sense of all they're doing is evil and it's just a crime ring. It's not necessarily fair to characterize political parties as an organized crime ring, although some people would. But you're absolutely right that it is the apparatus by which people are allowed or given a means to participate.
Mm.
because individual participation can be challenging. If you have an organization that shows you, like, you actually could just show up and do this thing. Do you want to come to this rally? Do you want to, build a float? The organization aspect of it is certainly one benefit that we can see even remaining today. But of course, we do have to remember that if we dropped William Henry Harrison in 2026, the country would be unrecognizable. Parties would be absolutely unrecognizable to him. The idea that foreign governments, foreign entities can funnel money into political parties, that when one leader of a foreign government loses an election, his opponent comes in and says something along the lines of, like, yeah, were you aware that the guy before me was funneling money to United States political organizations? We're not doing that anymore. The idea that that would happen in 2026, George Washington would be rolling in his grave, right? Like, George Washington hated foreign entanglements of that nature. So the idea that parties would evolve into having the amount of prevalence that they do now, where they control all of the, or a large chunk of the primary system, they determine who the candidates will be instead of going to a convention, for example. That you already know who the candidates are going to be by the time the convention rolls around. That's like a very weird idea. We've
Right.
elected presidents before, as you well know, Colleen, who were not even candidates before the convention happened. And
Yeah.
they're like, don't choose me. I am James Garfield. What are you
Garfield.
talking
Yeah, I was
about?
gonna say Garfield,
Yeah.
and then there's plenty of dark horses that come up.
Yes.
Harrison in
Yes.
some ways is a dark horse, but Polk is the classic a dark horse, but, we have many of these throughout
Yes.
history. Mhm,
I mean, even in the 1960s, even in 1968, when Lyndon Johnson was like, I'm not running again,
mhm.
even he went to the nominating convention, like, a little bit crossing his fingers. That'd be like, you know who we really need, though? We really need you back.
Right.
Like, he was
Exactly.
even like,
Right,
that
right.
he thought there was just like the tiniest chance in 1968 that the nod would go to him. So you can see how much the parties have evolved even since the late 1960s. There's been a huge change in the role that parties play in American politics.
Great. So, as we wrap up, Harrison, we before we move on, we have to say what happens. I mean, Harrison dies, and then we have the first succession from
Yes.
vice president to the presidency when John Tyler, who's kind of like a Whig in name only. I don't know how else to describe it, but
Mhm.
this is actually a really important moment in American
Yes.
history in 1841 because no one really knew if John Tyler was going to become the president or simply act as the
Right.
president. So,
Right.
if we would have had acting presidents throughout American history, imagine how different things would have been.
100%. It's like having the interim director of an organization until we can get somebody better.
Mhm.
We have
Yeah,
Sharon.
acting. I mean, and for good
Right.
and bad. I mean, maybe you don't have Andrew Johnson trying to dictate what Reconstruction is gonna be like
Yep.
in the wake of the Lincoln assassination, but then you also have someone like a Harry Truman that would have had his hands completely tied at the end of, World War II, and instead is able to step into the position and act as and with all the powers, including
Right.
commander in chief. But this is a really important moment, and Tyler kinda steps up, to the plate and hits it out of the park in a way.
Yeah. Yeah, he decides, like, no, we're not doing acting president. I am the president. It's important for America to have leadership in this moment of
Mhm.
great economic instability. As you mentioned, it's one of the reasons Harrison wins is because of the economic unrest under Van Buren. Um, America needs leadership in this moment. This is the first time a president has died in office. These are untested rules. We've put into place these rules in the Constitution that are a little bit vague.
Mhm.
In some cases, intentionally vague. In some cases, we had to go back and change it again about, like, what happens if we don't have a vice president? Because up until the time that we amended the Constitution
Right.
to allow a new vice president, the office of vice president sat empty 25% of the time.
Yes. Mhm.
So, the idea that, like, now we're actually going to have to use what we wrote down on paper was something that, like, all of the evidence shows that everybody who was involved in forming the framers of the Constitution, they all had questions about whether or not it was good enough, whether or not it would hold, whether or not we would, like in the words of Gouverneur Morris at Alexander Hamilton's funeral, whether or not we would just like devolve into tyranny. Like, is this experiment going to work? And we're still answering that question, right? We're still answering the question of where the American experiment is heading. But this was an important moment for Tyler to sort of answer the call when he certainly did not expect to have to become the president 31 days after becoming the vice president.
I think my favorite Tyler anecdote is that when some people thought he should remain the vice president. By the way, this was not like without controversy. He takes the oath of office very quickly. He affirms that he's the president. But then people continued to send him letters and correspondence addressed to Vice President Tyler or acting President Tyler. And when he gets those, he just sends them right back. He doesn't even open he won't open them. He's like, that's not me. I'm the president. I'm the president
That's
of
right.
the United States. I mean, that takes a certain amount of gumption to
Mhm.
do that, but he was very firm. He had other, qualities that maybe weren't quite so admirable, but in this one, Tyler is very firm and gives us this precedent that we end up, adopting throughout the rest of American history.
Uh,
So the last question, for In Pursuit, we try for all of our presidents and first ladies that we're studying, we try to boil things down to a lesson that is relevant for all Americans, no matter you don't have to be a historian, you don't have to be a government teacher, something that we can learn from this person's life and their leadership that's relative to democracy, relative to character, or relative, to leadership in general. So what can we learn
mhm.
from William Henry Harrison?
Mm. I think for me, one of the biggest takeaways is that a republic endures
Mhm,
when the citizens are loyal to the principles of democracy and not to a political party or to a single political figure.
mhm,
And we see this echoed in things like the oath of office that people will take when they ascend to, they're being they're ascending to the presidency, or they are being sworn into the Supreme Court, or even members of the military. They swear an allegiance to the Constitution and not to a single individual or to a political party. Imagine if members of the military swore an oath of office to the Whigs or to the Republicans or the Democrats. That's a recipe for disaster. We can see in a variety of ways why our highest allegiance is to the principles of democracy and to the nation itself. And our highest allegiance is not owed to a single individual or single political figure or to a preferred political party. And that was something that Harrison knew. And he came from a founding family.
mhm.
Right? He came from a founding family. These were lessons that he would have learned on his father's knee. And it was important to him. And I think those ideas still remain deeply important today.
Absolutely. And when, you serve in federal office like I did as archivist, you don't swear, to uphold the principles or the instructions of the president, no matter
Right.
who the president is. It is you take the oath, it's to the Constitution.
That's
And I
right.
always thought that I took that very seriously when
That's
I
right.
served as archivist of the United States. It was really important to me that even though I was nominated by President Biden, I wasn't beholden to any
That's
politics,
right.
whether, presidents, a member of Congress, or someone else, in the cabinet, nothing like that, because I had to be my own independent actor. I was answerable to the Constitution and the American people.
That's
Is
right.
what
That's right. And that's something that Americans have long understood, and
Mhm.
it's still a message that needs to be communicated today. It's not a message that we can just take for granted and be like, everyone knows that.
No,
It's
but yeah,
still a message that we need to impart to young people, that adults need to be reminded of, that our highest allegiance is not to a person or party, it is to the people of the nation and to the Constitution that governs them.
absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Sharon, for talking with us today about William
Yes.
Henry Harrison.
My pleasure.
thank you again for participating in Pursuit. If you haven't followed us on In Pursuit, please do so because we are welcoming people all the time, adding to our ranks. And we will be doing this all year, all throughout 2026. And having, we just had a great essay released today.
Yeah.
Former Congressman Steve Israel wrote a terrific essay on Millard Fillmore. And we're going to be entering this really interesting period in American history right before the Civil War. And we're going to see how different presidents tried to solve the crisis of slavery in the United States and ultimately ended up, not for lack of trying, but ended up failing. So the theme is going to be failure for the next
Yeah.
couple of
Yeah.
weeks. And it turns out we
I'm
can learn a lot from that, which will be good.
I'm very keen to read the upcoming essay on Buchanan
Oh,
for that
yes.
reason. For
In
that
fact,
reason.
yes, yes,
Yes.
will be excellent.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Sharon, and thanks to everybody who joined us this afternoon for our discussion.
Yes. Thanks. Thanks, Colleen. Always good to see you.
Bye. Good to see
Okay.
you.
Bye, everyone.